It's time to get nerdy, y'all.
A little bit of gaming history for you.
Something relevant in gaming and discuss our opinions on it.
Should we kick it out of here, or should we kick-start it?
This is the part where you, the listeners, try to stump the hosts.
I'm not a lawyer. I just play one on a podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, lads and lasses of all ages, welcome to the show. It is Tuesday, July 30th, 2024, and it's time to get nerdy. Welcome to episode 313 of Two Nerds in a Pod, the nerdiest video game podcast in the multiverse. I am Maction, one of your hosts, and I am joined by my co-host, a fellow nerd, a fellow connoisseur of comedy. He's not only the first option, he's also the best option, Mr. Lamgaluka, also known as Mr. Nice Guy 425, and for the next hour, we're going to talk about all things as they relate to video games, whether that's gaming news, whether that's history, trivia, lawsuits, everything through a lens of video games. But, Mr. Nice Guy, before we get started, I've had guests over the past couple of weeks, and I haven't been able to, well, I've recorded live, but not as we've done our usual live stream on Twitch.
Sure.
So, number one, it's good to see you again. But number two, dude, what have you been up to?
Dude, it's been a very, very busy 2 weeks in a good way. So there's been some work travel, and that was fun, very productive, and also interesting to see some different places. But I would say the highlight of the past 2 weeks, and the reason I wasn't here last week, is because I went on a camping trip with my oldest son and a group of guys, of friends we have locally, and just had a blast. We went up northern Wisconsin, to this camp, and did some fun outdoor activities, did some paintball at a really, really nice paintball facility, and did some tubing, some water tubing and water skiing, and all kinds of fun stuff, and just ate a bunch of bad food and had a really, really good time. I would say the highlight of the week was the paintball, and I had been paintballing a few times. My oldest son, who is 12, had never been paintballing before. And so at the end, and this is at a paintball facility, right? So they have all these different courses. Some of them are in the woods. At the end, we were doing this game called Attack the Hotel, where there's like a 2-story wall with a bunch of windows cut out. Yeah. And one team is defending, the other team is attacking. And I'm running towards the wall. We're almost out of time. And I see a path to get to the wall. The goal is for us to touch the wall. And the guy who's running the game, he comes over to me. He's like, hey, just so you know, don't go left. There's a wasp's nest over there. And I'm like, okay, I won't go that way. I'll go another way. Limits my options. And so I get up, and I'm about to go for the win, Mac. I can see it. I can taste it. I can feel it. And all of a sudden, I also feel paintballs striking me in the side as I'm trying to be stealthy. And I didn't get it. And my son was on the other team. And so after the game, he's like, Dad, I just want you to know I got you. That was me that shot you. Yeah, and there were probably like 18 to 20 of us on each team, and he happened to be the one who took me out. So great memory. We had a really, really good time. Unplugged for a few days and had a blast.
I mean, if anybody was going to stop you from victory, the son, that's just poetic.
The Fortnite has been paying off. But, Mac, what's new with you?
Dude, over the past couple of weeks, it's interesting that it's been a lot of, like, car stuff, car-related things. While I do a lot of driving, it's I also maintain my own vehicles, and so every so often something goes wrong, and since I'm in the middle of nowhere, that sometimes means late-night repairs. Now, thankfully, it looks like everything's good, knock on wood. But that has been certainly hanging over my head. The plus side, though, is that normally we don't get many visitors out here in the middle of nowhere, but for the past several weeks, we've had folk over all the time, which has been really, really enjoyable. It's been nice to have friends and just spend time hanging out, although it does cast into sharp relief just how much there is not going on in my neck of the backwoods, just because of how frequently we wind up, well, what are we going to do today? Well, we're going to have a hangout and go for a walk, and that's where we're at.
I like it. I half expected you to say, what are we going to do today? Try to take over the world.
Yes. That is always the backup plan. But that's pretty much what I've been up to, Mr. Nice Guy, aside from, just the sort of day in, day out of work and such.
Nice. Well, I am particularly excited to do this episode. It seems like every year as we get close to the podcast awards, there's one of us, probably me, that has to miss a couple weeks just because there's things going on. So shout out to our guests who were able to step in the past 2 weeks and help out with keeping your feeds full of content.
Indeed. And on that note, the podcast awards, by the time you are watching this, if you're watching it live, you still have 1 day left to vote. And make sure that you put us as your choices in Best Black Hosted, Games and Hobbies, and in People's Choice. That's the overall category. But if you are listening to this on your podcast feed, you may have just a few precious hours in order to hop on board that. By the time most of you hear this, voting will be closed, and we will find out whether or not we made it onto the final slates of the categories that we were eligible in. And for anybody who did vote for us over the past month, thank you.
Appreciate y'all. And on that note, I say we do what we do best, Mac, and hop right up in that gaming news. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. Mr. Nice Guy, what has been going on in Vigigaming?
So much. And episode 313 of Two Nerds in a Pod is a nerdiest video game podcast in the galaxy. Mac, before we started this week's episode, I was just telling you how my second monitor has died, and I feel like my screen is too cramped. I have Discord open, I have OBS open for streaming, Audacity for recording audio, and then a window just to be able to see different things like the Twitch chat. Integration of applications is very important, and that is what our first news story is about today. This is on GameSpot.com, written by Luis Joshua Gutierrez. He writes, if Roll20 and Discord are your tools of choice while playing online, your virtual tabletop just got streamlined thanks to Discord's new Roll20 integration. Setting this up isn't all that difficult. As the official Roll20 YouTube channel explains, users need only to join a voice lobby and click on the Choose an Activity button. From there, they can select Roll20 and invite their friends via the Invite Activity button. Blah, blah, blah. You log into Roll20, etc., etc. Mac, this is very, very big to me because I know that during COVID, as we were playing different GURPS games and different D&D games that we had going on, we started using Roll20. And similar to my conflict of trying to stream with one screen, this makes it so much easier for people to not multitask, but have everything integrated. And so my question for you is, one, what do you think about this? Obviously, you're going to be happy about it. But two, what other things would you like to see integrated into Discord that are maybe related to either literal electronic gaming or tabletop gaming? What else can they do to make our lives easier?
I hate to be contrarian, Mr. Nice Guy, but I'm actually not the biggest fan of most app integrations.
Really?
Yeah, I think that the Discord Roll20 is probably maybe a good thing, but it already had a baked-in Roll20 had a baked-in sort of audio and visual video client that I think was just fine. But in general, I am the type of person who, in spite of having a podcast that regularly puts out details about himself, those are the details I decide to put out. I'm concerned about privacy, and inevitably, when you start integrating various things, you've got more points where more data is easier to be breached from, and rarely, if ever, are we ever let in as consumers as to what types of data and information gets shared between apps. So you may never have had a Facebook account, you may have had an Instagram, but then, your data still winds up going through those similar hands. Instagram gets a hack or Facebook gets a hack, and then the stuff that you didn't think that you had shared with that company winds up going places you didn't share. And that's kind of my overall. But even to the more specific and not the doom and gloominess about, Discord and Roll20 integration, I kind of felt like, Roll20 did an okay job on its own. And I kind of felt like separating the two, having my, Discord gaming stuff in one sphere and having my tabletop stuff in another sphere was actually kind of how I liked it. So, but I mean, I'm sure for the great majority of people, this is going to be something that is rejoiced about. I can kind of see what you're saying about it being easier.
Well, and I mean, this is not to say that you have to use the app. You can still use them separately. It's just saying that, hey, if you want to integrate these things, that's great. Now, I am not as much into GURPS and D&D as you. I don't know how many people were probably using the voice integration of Roll20. Have you ever tried it? Is it solid? Is it smooth? Or would you rather use Discord? I mean, clearly we were using Discord and Roll20, right? So I don't know how the voice is over there.
So it's fine. Now, keep in mind that with the exception of a brief shining moment in 2020, wow, that seems like a strange phrase to say, when I suddenly had the highest internet speeds of my entire life in the middle of nowhere, that I have been dealing with very, very subpar internet experiences basically my entire adult life.
Sure.
The few times that I used it and I had, good internet, it worked just fine and did a great job of having, you had your videos and you had your audio right there on the tabletop surface. If you recall those areas where we had like our little photo pictures in the bottom corners as we were in, that just had the video, and the video integration was fine and the audio was perfectly reasonable as well. I would say maybe 10% less good than a Discord call. But that's, but it was certainly fine for those aspects. But I haven't used it in my current stance, so I don't know if it's better, worse, or about the same for somebody with limited internet. Although I will say this, Mr. Nice Guy, the Roll20 doing both the video, the voice, and the tabletop maps all in one was useful when my internet bandwidth was much decreased, because I was only pushing to one service instead of two services at the same time.
I'll say the positives of this are that it brings people together, right? I love that PlayStation is now available on Discord, and you might think, why would you ever need to use Discord with your PlayStation? Well, if I'm playing Helldivers 2 and I have a friend who's on Steam, and we want to use Discord to communicate, I can now log into my PlayStation and use Discord chat to communicate with him while he plays Helldivers on his PC, because it is a cross-play game. So I like that type of integration. I like that it brings people together in that regard. I'll also say Discord is kind of the definitive chat for a lot of different type of gamers. Many people have a name on Discord, and they use it for multiple things. They use it for chatting. They use it for memes. They use it for PC gaming. They use it for GURPS or D&D, and maybe they use it for their console gaming as well. So the idea that now we can use Roll20 there, I think, is good, but I also get the privacy concerns. We got a great story about the Xbox 360 marketplace that everyone's angry about. This is on GamesRadar.com, and this one happens to be written by Catherine Lewis, published 2 days ago. A former Xbox exec has paid tribute to the Xbox 360 marketplace on its final day, saying that all good things must come to an end. Today, when this was written, July 29th, will mark the end of the Xbox 360 store, after almost 19 years of service. Later today, you'll no longer be able to make fresh purchases directly on your 360 or the Marketplace website, meaning any nostalgic players hoping to add to their classic console's library are almost out of luck. While it'll still be possible to re-download games you've already bought, play online on the console as long as the individual game servers are still supported, and download backwards compatible 360 games on an Xbox One or Series X and S, it's still very much the end of an era, as Xbox's veteran Larry Herb acknowledges. Mac, it's interesting. After this happened, GameStop had the audacity to tweet out, "Man, I bet y'all wish you had bought your physical games for 360 instead," which is absurd in a lot of ways. But I have two questions for you. Number one, favorite Xbox 360 memory, or you can just go favorite Xbox memory before 360, whatever works. And then two, what do you think about this store shutting down but still allowing the downloads to happen?
Let me start with number two first. I like it. Even if the store is shut down, still being able to get your old purchases is certainly something. And it's nice. I would like for there to be an option. I don't know how many things are going to fall by the wayside, but I'm sure that the number is a non-zero number of things that can't be purchasable for a variety of reasons on other things, like that are still solely there on the Xbox 360.
Sure,
Again, I don't
indie
know what
games.
the number is, especially indie games. First question, though. Favorite Xbox 360 gaming memory? Probably Castle Crashers.
Nice. Tell us a little bit
And-
more about that.
So, Castle Crashers, if you haven't played it, is a side-scrolling kind of beat-em-up game where you have multiple characters that are working together, and then at the very end of each level, there happens to be a princess or a MacGuffin of some type that you're fighting over. And as you defeat the boss, then you all fight each other to see who has the victory, who gets the thing. Not that it matters because you all progress to the next level, but it still is a sort of fun beat it up thing. And you have a little bit of the ability to, upgrade the characters down the one of the 4 paths, build up those attributes that you like. But it was this slightly absurdist, cartoony thing. Not as absurd as we've seen some things go, but just absurd enough. But I feel like for a lot of us, Castle Crashers was our sort of first thing on the Xbox 360 marketplace that most of us bought. I don't know, because I haven't looked, I don't know if Castle Crashers was ever offered as a physical or whether it was purely a digital purchase always and everywhere. And I think, though, that it is one of those things that is still available today. And if memory serves, I think they actually released an update for it. But that can't possibly be the truth. Mr. Nice Guy, you're going to have to tell me what the truth is here.
There's an update for Castle Crashers? I honestly don't know. But I do know that I believe it's on Steam now. So there's multiple ways to play it. But that aside, my favorite Xbox 360 memory, there's so many. And I feel like I've told this story over the course of 300 episodes at least once or twice about how 2010, the year my wife and I got married, got myself an Xbox 360 for Christmas. And she got herself some great craft stuff on her end. But it was a console that really changed me and changed me as a gamer, because previously I was a Nintendo and a Sony guy. It's the console that got me into RPGs. It's the console that really got me into first-person shooters. If I have to pick just one memory, Mac, it's going to a thrift store. Me and my wife, fairly close to the time had just been married, looking at retro games and just striking up a conversation with a stranger, and him saying, "Have you tried the new Call of Duty? It's the best game ever made." And he said it with such conviction that I had to go out and I had to buy that game. And I bought Call of Duty Black Ops. Some would say it's a bro game. Some would say it's a casual game. I don't care. That game is amazing and really changed my view on the first-person shooter genre and really got me into it. And to this day, I'm a huge Call of Duty fan, particularly of the Treyarch games. So that's just one. I have like a dozen memories, but that's just one for the sake of time. And then Zombie Home Evening, Mac.
Yep, Zombie Home. So what we used to do is we used to get together on Mondays and play Left 4 Dead and then Left 4 Dead 2 all together in the basement. It was a good time. It was a great time, man. I did not appreciate in the moment how great it was living in the same town as opposed to across the country from each other.
Yeah, that was like one of the first times Mac and I hung out. Well, Mac, there's other news stories, but there's so much stuff to talk about. We could never get through all of it. That has been our news for the week.
All right. Well, now that we've looked at what's going on around us right now, let's take a little look into the past with some video game history. And Mr. Nice Guy, I want to open with probably one of the coolest ones first. And this is something that we talked about last episode in history, so I apologize for the repeat, but I wanted to be the one to see the light in Mr. Nice Guy's eyes.
Okay.
And that is talking about the first video game achievements. Mr. Nice Guy, when do you think the first achievements given for video game? And to define, we are talking about the dev, the publisher of the game, bestowing upon you an achievement for getting 10,000 points in their game, 20,000 points, and doing this not just for like a single person, not just like a certificate of achievement for the highest score known to man in Donkey Kong, but like legit anybody who hits this metric gets a thing from the dev. When do you think that is?
That's a good question, and it's fitting that we're talking about the Xbox 360 because that's when I first really started focusing on achievements.
For so many of us, yeah.
Right, and I think that the Xbox 360 was released in, 2006 maybe? So it had to be prior to that, and I'm going to assume that it wasn't the 360 that started achievements, because I know Steam has achievements as well. So I'm going to go with 1999.
Excellent guess, Mr. Nice Guy. Dead wrong, but it's a great guess. Try 1981.
Wow.
In the early Atari days, in the early Atari days, we had a game publisher by the name of Activision. And they did a little thing called Freeway. It was basically a version of Frogger, but with a chicken crossing the road for the Atari 2600. And in that, they said, if you can get 20 crossings in one go on Game 3 or Game 10, and back in those days, you flipped switches on the Atari to determine which of the game modes you were in, of course. So that was how you had Game 3 or Game 10. And you took a picture of that and sent it to them, they would send you an award. And what they did was they basically had these embroidered patches that were about yay big, about this, I don't know, that you can do, but for all this, and they did that for this game. So you got an achievement for getting that many of crossings. I do believe it is the first of the video game achievements from a game developer to the players. But they did that for a whole slew, 34 titles between July of 1981 and June of 1983 that you could submit your things, get an embroidered patch. And just fantastic.
Love
obviously,
it.
we would see lots more achievements later with the Xbox 360, like you were talking. But this is, I think, the genesis of the idea. And good times. Moving right along to some other cool video game history stuff. 1983, we had an arcade game by the name of Tapper. Mr. Aska, have you played this one before?
I have not played Tapper, but is it a reference to like running a bar or something like
Yeah.
that? I've heard of it, but I have not played it. Tell me more.
So you're basically a bartender. You're filling mugs, and then you slide them down the bar. You have multiple columns that you can go in, and you need to keep sending these drinks out to thirsty patrons. When it first came out in 1983, it was actually sponsored by Anheuser-Busch and featured the Budweiser logo. So it was the first game that was designed in order to be an advertisement for an IRL company that was not like the developer. It was the first, like, we made this game. You didn't just get your product placed in this game. Your product was the game. When it turned out to be crazy popular, they then made a slightly more kid-friendly one with root beer that I believe made its way onto the Nintendo and into later arcade cabinets. And that's probably the one that most people are familiar with, because past a certain point they went that route with it. Let's see. Just a couple more quick ones. In 2016 for the Sega Genesis, one of our favorite indie games, a game called Cave Story, got a Genesis port. It's originally had its life many years before in PC, but got that Genesis port. I've played it. It's a fantastic game, both in PC as well as in the Genesis, and it's really fun sometimes to see games that are redone on more constrained hardware and where those corners get cut, but yet still how super functional everything is. Although it didn't happen this week, another fun one in this vein is Alwa's Awakening that got released on PC and then got an NES demake. And it's very, very impressive.
I gotta ask you, off topic, do you have a backlog of games that you want to replay? Just like in your head.
So many. Yeah.
Because for me, Cave Story is one of those games, and it's a nostalgia thing. I'll always think back to the first time that I played it, how much I loved it, and what a great game it was. But it's one of those games that also I'm like, should I replay this or should I find new awesome stuff? And I never get back to it. Great game, though.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Great game. Last but most certainly not least, perhaps my favorite, released in 2018 for all the modern stuffs, Chasm. A game that I kickstarted way, way back in the day. We saw the release in 2018 and is still one of my favorites. Looking forward to a new title from the same devs in the near future, but couldn't be more specific than that. But anyway, that's what I had for history for us for this week.
Love it, love it, love it. Well, Mac, I'm excited because we're bringing back a segment today. A segment called Indie Game of the Week, where we talk about a game that deserves more or that hasn't gotten... I don't even know how to do the intro anymore to this segment. It's been so long. A game that may need more attention and determine whether or not it deserves your attention. Now, Mac, we want to let the people know we came to a conclusion pre-show. And it's that as much as we love this segment, there are a lot of games that deserve more than a week to review. And so while the segment is back, we may not do this every week. We're going to make sure, as we always have, that we're giving games their due diligence and that we don't get burned out trying to play a game every week. Is that a good summary of what we talked about?
Yes, I would agree with that. So look forward to this, but don't expect it every single one. Some games take more than a week to take a look.
Absolutely. This one, though, I was very excited for because this is a game that I've been following for a long time in its development, and one that I had messaged back and forth with the dev a little bit before its release. Today, Mac, we're going to review Fallen Leaf. Those codes for the review were provided and do not affect our opinion. So thank you to the devs for the codes. We truly appreciate it. Here's the description on Steam. Fallen Leaf is a retro side-scrolling adventure focused on tight, action-packed level design, set in a whimsical world where almost anything goes. It was released July 15th of this year. Developer and publisher are Delta Shore Games. Currently sitting at 83 reviews on Steam with a very positive rating. And the current cost is $16.99. Mac, excited to hear, one, where you played this game, on what console or platform, and two, what you thought.
So I played this both on my desktop as well as on my Steam Deck. It just kind of depended the time of day, but I played most of my time on the Steam Deck. It does benefit from a controller, so I would advise you... I mean, I tried keyboard for the first several levels and, was much more at home with a gamepad.
Nice. And what did you think of the game?
Well, it checks all the boxes for Mac. In general, it has a, shall we say, Mega Man-esque style to it. A very similar styling of mechanics in it. It does have a little bit of difference, though, because you get powered up and you have a certain amount of health. Of course, you can take more than one hit. You start out being able to take 3 hits, and you've also got 3 levels of power, although the levels of power remain the same, but the amount of hits that you can take increases over time as you complete side quests and unlock things. However, when you take a hit, you lose all of your stuff, kind of like in the way that we would do Super Mario Brothers. Doesn't matter that you're third powered up, you take the hit, you're down to little Mario again. And same thing, sort of thing here. So it has that style of stuff, in addition to it being the sort of move and shoot style that you have going in Mega Man, at least to start.
Nice. And one thing I liked about this game is that rather than having 1 or 2 characters who get a bunch of different type of weapons, there are a lot of different characters that you can add to your party that have different abilities. And I won't say what all of them are, but, some can shoot faster, some jump in different ways, some have different types of attack. It's that type of thing. And the way that you get these characters, some are just part of the story. Some you have to search a little bit more for. You have to earn things or complete different side quests in order to do them. One thing that I liked about this game, rather than some other games we've played, is that it is map-based. So similar to like a Super Mario 3 or a Mario World, there's a map with levels and they're bite-sized. So you can really pick this up and play a 5 or 10 minute session without feeling like you're getting lost or having to backtrack, because each of the levels are pretty easy to get through. I have completed the game within the 20 or so hours it took me. I got 22 of the 26 achievements, and there is a little bit more to do. This isn't a huge spoiler, but there is a new game plus that you can play once you complete the game. And I don't know that that's completely necessary. You know, the one thing that I would fault this game on is I don't know if there is a ton of replayability, but at this price point, I think that is okay. Controls are tight, story is good. There's NPCs, and there is a little bit of exploration that you have to do to unlock everything. And I like that there's multiple levels of dialogue within the talkable or speakable characters. And it's just a good all-around game. Like, I had a blast with this. Mac, what was your overall verdict on it?
Yeah, so I've only made it just barely to the end of World 4, so I'm still working through it. Again, company over has made it a bit rough to get the time. But I liked it. I will say there are a couple of things that I really appreciated, and maybe one or two that I didn't. I think there are collectibles in each level. And there's at least, completing the level and one collectible that you pick up that unlocks stuff later. But sometimes there's a third thing you can do in a level. And whether or not those are present are clearly listed on the, on the landing splash screen, if you will, when you get to a level. And while I do appreciate a little bit of mystery and intrigue in a game, I like knowing what I'm getting in for or what I need to be looking for or where I should be focusing. I find it very frustrating when I'm like, oh, there is still a collectible out there that I need to get, but I have absolutely no basis to go on. I find that to be particularly annoying. So this is something that I felt like was a perfect choice and made me really love and appreciate the design choices. I will say, though, that I found of all the options of the team members, I did find that I just had the one that I really liked.
Yeah.
Stuck with that one for the whole thing. Maybe I switched off if there was a very, very difficult spot. The second character you get has what do they call them? Options is what you would call them in a shmup. It's a type of thing that orbits near you and shoots projectiles. And almost every projectile does not go through solid objects, but the option will go through solid objects. And so making use of that one thing, I was always switching to her, taking out those enemies in those tight areas, and then switching right back. So while I very much appreciate the utility, I found that I was just like, hey, let's just go this one route.
Yeah, and there's another character I got that definitely became my go-to. I don't want to spoil it for anyone. And there were points where I feel like I was maybe a little bit overpowered. And I once again, I don't want to spoil anything, but I've found that with these types of games, that if you collect as much as possible before you get to the final boss, that the final boss is going to be so much more, I'll just say, easy to beat. And so I spent a good amount of time collecting power-ups, doing the different side quests, knowing that I would get things that would help me when I got to the end game, and they ultimately did. My one complaint about this game is that I really don't like artificial replayability. And so the idea of a new game plus where I collect all the stuff and play through one and then play through it again and already have everything, and maybe it's a little harder, maybe it's a little different, that just doesn't appeal to me. Last thing I'll say is that, like Mac, there's a lot of characters that you can collect in this game. There's also a lot of weapons that you can collect as a secondary weapon. And I stuck to like 2 or 3 characters, and I stuck to like 1 or 2 weapons. So I just didn't feel like it was necessary to put those all in the game just for the sake of doing so. But the game is well made, the story is good, and I had a blast with it.
As a counterpoint, I am almost positive that my choice in sub-weapons different from yours. So and my choice of characters, maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, but I just went with the first option with Leaf the whole time.
Interesting. I did not, but that's good to know.
Yeah. So I think it's good that they've got him there, and you know what? Maybe there is somebody out there for everyone in the multitude of characters.
No, this is a good game. Like, before we get to that, Mac, to wrap this up, price point $16.99. Do you think that's reasonable? And then number 2 on the 5-point scale, what would you give this game?
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. I'd give it a 4.5.
Yeah, I think, with this type of game, an hour per dollar is kind of what I think is reasonable, and I definitely got 20 or so hours out of it. And I was 85% of the way complete based on the menu screen. So still some stuff to do, and I do want to complete it. I gave this one a 4. It does everything that it's trying to do very well. It doesn't bring anything new to the table, in my opinion. And so the highest I could give it was a 4, but I highly recommend you buy this game, and I hope it's in my top 5 at the end of the year.
Yeah.
That has been our indie game of the week.
All right. Well, now let's turn to something that's trying to get off of the ground. We've seen stuff with some polish. Let's see some stuff that maybe needs some of our attention to get started. This is Kick or Kickstart, a crowdfunding project that we will discuss and see whether or not it should be kicked out of here or kick-started. This is called Project X Light Years. This is a shmup style game. So if you haven't played one of those, that's the general genre, a shoot 'em up. The idea is that you tend to have often a somewhat small portion of the screen for your usually a ship, but oftentimes it can be things like dragons, magical girls, whatever, and other things that are shooting at you that you need to avoid their blasts and shoot them. So now that we're all clear on what that is, this project is looking for $6,500 with 58 days left to go, and they're at $1,300 at the moment. So they still got a little ways. Now, the minimum buy-in is $13, and the expected launch date is December of this year. So only about 3 to 4-ish months out. So this game very much bills itself as being a reimagining of the classic side-scroller. The video that they have is about 2 minutes in length that shows several areas where they try and do, X, Y, and Z. It's just like, oh, here's some examples of some enemies. Here's some examples of some power-ups, and so on. This is a spiritual successor to the classic Amiga, CD32, and MS-DOS games. And while I see and what they're going for, I can't help but be like, for it being a modern shmup, I feel like they didn't take that much time to think outside of the box in the ways that modern could improve the formula, if that makes sense. Mr. Nice Guy, do you have some thoughts?
First impression is that this looks like a type of game I would just play for free in my web browser. And looks aren't everything, but just having played games for a while, and having podcasted for a while and look at these Kickstarters, I can kind of tell when something, I don't want to say is cheaply made, but maybe the focus on quality is not there. And this appears to be kind of like, hey, I took a game design class and now I have to put together a final project so I can pass this class, and this is what I came up with. We have to be honest with the audience. That's the impression that I get from this. And I think that the price point in terms of what they're trying to raise over 60 days kind of backs that up. So I just can't say it any more bluntly. I'm just not impressed.
Yeah. To your point about the looks involved, at the last portion of a Kickstarter, at least for the past, year, perhaps more, there has been a little area for you to declare your use of AI, if any, in the game. And there is the plan for there to be the use of AI-generated content in this project, and it seems like there already has been some. Because in that it says that they've already used Midjourney to create variants of level backgrounds, which, okay, sure. But it does kind of feel like there is an overall, like there's a bit more prevalent. The artwork doesn't especially seem to bear the usual trappings of something that has been made from scratch. It seems to be iterative or generative. And maybe we're incorrect about that. But yeah, it seems like there has not been the sort of level of, dare I say, effort that we tend to see in Kickstarters that push us forward.
So I'm looking at the quotes right now, and a lot of times when people have a Kickstarter, they will have quotes from reputable sources that review games that say things like, I tried this game and it's great, or, this brings me back, or, 10 out of 10 or something like that. These are all quotes from people who made shmups before and say things like, hey, we're glad we could provide inspiration for your game. It warms my heart to see that anyone would want to make a tribute game. Good luck. And to me, that's not the type of quote that you put on your game to get people to buy it. That's the type of quote that you just tell your friends about. Like, no one has said that they've tried your game and it's going to be good or that it looks promising. I guess this does say it looks great, but to me, this is all words of support rather than words that are validating the game.
And another thing is that it's fair to put out there that Mr. Nice Guy and I have probably never seen... I mean, I know I haven't seen the game Project X. And this game, Project X Light Years, is meant to be a spiritual successor to said original. So while shmups generally aren't my thing, maybe we just lack the context. In which case, I hope that there are plenty of people out there who've seen the original Project X and feel like this is a worthy successor. But I feel like this is the fella's first Kickstarter. And while there is a playable demo that you can try out on Steam, I just don't feel like the combination of what I've seen here, the asking price, as well as, really everything else about it, and the use, or what I think of not really being that attention to detail, I think would certainly be a pass for me, in spite of the kind words of those fellow shmuppers.
There is so much good stuff out there. As someone who really likes shmups, I find that with this genre, I generally only like the ones that I have nostalgia for. I know we played Shieldmade RX, and that was one of the very first games that we ever did on Indie Game of the Week. So shout out to them. But generally speaking, I'm just not blown away by these. So I am going to kick this for the reasons I mentioned already.
Yeah, and I'm with you as well. Obviously, we wish everyone the best. However, this one just not quite for us.
All right. Well, now it's time for Nerd Flex. A woohoo.
Woo.
A segment where you, the viewers, try to stump the hosts. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. If you're here live, you have a job to do. Put a multiple choice gaming-related question in the chat. Mac and I will use nothing but our noggins to try to answer. We also have a test bank that has been newly updated with randomly generated questions related to gaming, and Mac and I will try to answer them. So, Mac, to start off, we have a special round question, and I think that we'll be able to do this one.
Okay. Just as a recap, special round questions, the idea is for us to meet a minimum, but try and get as high as we can on the things, because it's not multiple choice.
Name 3 games ported from arcades to consoles. Name 3 games ported from arcades to consoles. Mac, what do we think?
Okay.
I can think of a couple.
Yeah, I can think of Gauntlet. I can also think of NBA Jam. That got a port to the Sega Genesis and I think the Super Nintendo as well. Mortal Kombat, and I don't know if this is entirely fair, but Super Mario Bros. Appeared first on arcade.
Are you sure?
99.9% sure that it appeared on like the Play Choice 10 before we got it on the NES.
See, and I don't think that was the case. Well, you know what? You might be right. Although I don't know if that's considered a port because I believe the Play Choice 10 was designed for people to be able to demo NES games before purchasing them on the Nintendo Entertainment System. Now, I don't know which one came first, but I wonder if technically it's not a port because the game was already made for NES, but then there was a demo that was put out. Who knows? But I will add to your list, the Simpsons arcade game has absolutely been ported from arcade to console. Pretty sure that Space Invaders was obviously on arcade before it was ever on console. And we could go with Asteroids as well. So there's a lot. We've named several.
We throw out Pong in there because, of course, obviously we had home console ports of Pong. Breakout, as we know. Oh, gosh. I mean, a lot of stuff.
There's only a few listed here, but I'm pretty sure that the ones we have named were good. It just says examples: Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, Golden Axe, NBA Jam. I mean, obviously we got this right. We named several that I know for a fact reported. So if there's others you know of, let us know in the chat. We're always looking for more. Mac, would you do the honors? So that's 1 for 1. Would you do the honors of reading the question in the chat?
Absolutely. Flaming Phoenix asks, which of the following is required to figure out a puzzle in Animal Well? Is it A, a knowledge of the Fibonacci sequence, B, a printer, C, a microphone, or D, a way to hear directional audio? So, real talk, I have not played Animal Well. I just know that it is a game that does have puzzles. That's it.
Yeah.
Required. I feel like knowledge of a thing, I mean, I feel like you could stumble across something mathematically. You could just stumble across the right answer. So I feel like the say that this is required probably means like a hardware limitation. And that I feel is borne out by the fact that, you know, B, C, and D, that 3 of the answers are all hardware limitations rather than knowledge limitations.
So here's the thing. I know of this game, and it's actually like high on my list to play because it may end up being one of my games of the year. A way to hear directional audio, like this is a game that's very much playable on Steam Deck. It's like a 2D side-scroller, pixelated Metroidvania puzzle game. So in my mind, directional audio is eliminated just based on the virtue of the type of game it is. Now, I'm wondering if he's talking about in-game printer or in-game microphone as a way of solving these puzzles.
Ooh, that's a good question. I assumed it was talking about IRL equipment.
Well, that's absolutely not the case. So maybe it is a knowledge of the Fibonacci sequence.
So honestly, I'm kind of leaning toward, of all of them, a way to hear directional audio. Because like, even if we're just talking left and right channels, that's something that you could have potentially. So I was going to lean that way, of them all.
Interesting. This is super tough.
Yeah.
And I've watched reviews for Animal Well, and I don't think that this was ever brought up. We got to, I guess, decide together. So
Yes.
why don't we, if he's talking about in real life, I know it's not microphone and I know it's not printer because...
Aside from streamers, who's got a microphone? And aside from your grandparents, who's got a printer?
Right. So let's go with the way to hear directional audio. D, what do you think, Mac?
Yeah, please, D, final answer.
Let us know if that is correct.
Oh, B. One puzzle, specifically for a collectible, requires you to have a printer, the physical device.
That's so interesting. I'm excited to play this game.
Yeah, the printer would have never occurred to me. So congrats, Flaming Phoenix. Well, that's 50% so far, Mr.
1
Nice Guy.
for 2. Here is question number 3. Konami was founded in 1969 as what sort of business? This is a great question. Konami was founded in 1969 as what sort of business?
Oh, man. 69. My inclination is to say that it was like pachinko or plinko, or pachinko. It's a type of like, I don't know if it's fair to call it a gambling thing, but it's certainly like an entertainment game that would have been big in 69 in Japan, or in the, in that general region, I think.
My thought is some type of like hardware. Like maybe TVs, not PCs, but maybe like some type of electronic hardware company.
Like
That's
radios or something?
Yeah, like radios or like I said, TVs or microphones or something electronic hardware. That's my thought. But we can go different
So
directions.
just before we flip it or anything like that, I will say this plays upon a sleeping memory, because I remember us going a certain number of years without getting any Metal Gear franchise releases. And I seem to recall reading an article of someone like, we haven't seen a new Metal Gear in ages, but you know what we are getting this year? A Metal Gear pachinko machine. And that's par for the course with Konami, who was founded on doing pachinko machines. So it's like this. It could be wrong. It could be a weird headcanon thing, but I just feel like that's the answer.
Dude, let's find out. We're flipping the card. Okay, so I was closer than you.
Oh,
It was jukebox repairs.
Jukebox repairs. Okay.
That is very, very specific.
That is. And that is clearly, I think if we were going to give somebody the thing that's 100% you and not me, and I don't know what I was thinking.
No worries. Well, hey, thanks for playing, everybody. 1 for 3 today. That has been our Nerdflex.
All right. Well, now we turn to a little bit of legalese.
Legalese.
Mr. Nice Guy, there's a lot of law-adjacent video game stuff to talk about, and so many things that I want to discuss, like BCG versus GameStop. We talked about that way back in episode 221, but there's been some updates on that case, but I think that can wait until later. Some other stuff, obviously over the past couple of weeks, we had that, what was it? Was it Cloudflare or what have you? A lot of cloud things, yeah, and of course it grounded a lot of airplanes and such. It also brought down some video games that relied on those back ends, and there's some interesting legal stuff to talk about there. But I think even that can wait, because we do have a time-sensitive thing on the Stop Killing Games front.
Ooh, let's hear it.
If you don't mind me asking, just in case there are any new folk out there, we had Ross Scott on to do an interview. Could you do us a kindness and bring some folk up to speed on what, the general push of the Stop Killing Games stuff is?
Yeah, I would say, in a way, if I was going to say it in one sentence, it's game preservation. So it's allowing people who have purchased games to be able to continue to access those games, and basically telling companies that they have an obligation to allow people to be able to still access those games. It doesn't mean the servers stay up forever, but effectively, when games like The Crew just go offline and they can no longer be accessed anymore, that is the type of good fight that Ross Scott is fighting with his Stop Killing Games goal.
Couldn't have said it better. The real hope is that the company has to leave it in a playable situation when they decide that they no longer want to support it. They don't have to change anything about the way that they do the game, but when they say, we're done, you need to leave it so that the rest of us can still do it. But this Stop Killing Games movement has taken many different forms: direct government petitions, various citizens initiatives, legal challenges, and there's a little bit of everything all coming to head at the same time. Well, the latest and the newest thing that can be done is going right now, and that is the European Citizens Initiative, which is now open as of the time that you are hearing this. So the way that this works is that you are required to have 7 European Union citizens, each from a different European Union country. They then stand behind that they want this initiative, and they get their initiative registered with the European Union Commissioner. You pick your start date for when you're going to start collecting signatures from the European Union countries generally. That start date is July 31st, 2024. And then you have 12 months to gather sufficient signatures to meet those thresholds. And because, while today is July 30th, it is tomorrow in the European Union, so this has just gone live minutes before we started our recording. So what you can do, and I'll leave a link to the initiative detail, but it is aptly named Stop Destroying Video Games, and the deadline for the completion is July 31st, 2025. as people who are in the European Union continue to add their voices to this and sign on and say, yes, this is important to me, within a certain period of time, they're guaranteed, as long as they meet the signatures, to have European Commission representatives meet with you to help you prepare for, at the 3-month point, when you present your petition directly to European Union Parliament. And then, whether or not European Parliament does a thing, passes legislation or starts that ball rolling, after 6 months after it closes, the Commission tells you, kind of gives you ideas of what you can do next or legal steps you can do. So you get enough people to sign on, and you're guaranteed to get some amount of direct government help for not only preparing a presentation to Parliament, but also to, after the fact, if nothing happens, to try and help legally prepare you for things. To put this into context for our U.S. listeners, if enough people signed on to a thing, instead of it just being screaming into the void, what if you actually had like an attorney general who sat down with you and your people and was just like, all right, so let's talk about the best legal arguments for what you're talking about, because in 3 months' time, you're going to walk in front of Congress in an open session and you're going to be able to present your initiative for them to vote on. And then you get a thing. So it's actually, while it takes a lot of signatures, it is a very sort of friendly way to approach and to walk somebody who might just be lay people like ourselves through a potentially difficult legal situation. The thresholds, for example, in countries range based on their population, range from anywhere to the thresholds being, say, something like 13,000 signatures in the country of Austria, to something like 5,000 signatures in the country of Estonia. And if you meet these thresholds, and I believe, and this is where I'm not 100% clear, so forgive me, but I believe if you meet the threshold in any one of the countries, you get your day. But if you meet in many, then even better. Obviously, it has only just barely begun, minutes before we started recording, but if you happen to know somebody in the European Union, or you happen to be a EU citizen yourself, you can participate by reading through the initiative detail and then signing on that is something you would like the European Union to definitively say, hey, it should be this way. And I always like to reflect back that it was people in Australia, it was just the country of Australia telling Steam that it was not okay for them to not allow refunds for us across the whole of the world to get refunds as an option on Steam. So changes that happen at a legal level in some countries can make it just more convenient to have one system that works for everybody. And that would hopefully be the same way for the European Union. So we'll keep you updated, but that's where we are now. We can now hop on if you're a European Union citizen.
Love it, love it, love it. Let's keep games out there for those of us who want to play them, regardless of what the devs are doing. Well, Mac, friends, Romans, countrymen, that has been our show. Thank you for tuning in. Before we go, we have one last segment we do every week called What We've Been Watching and What We've Been Playing, where we talk about just that, the cool, nerdy stuff we've been into across all platforms. Mac, what you been watching and playing the past 2 weeks? And by the way, if you're here live, let us know in the chat what you've been watching and playing.
Well, so there is a Dimension 20. It's they're using kids on brooms. It's a TRPG system. Point being, it's called Never Stop Blowing Up, and it's basically a love letter to 80s action flicks, but done in the sort of tabletop RPG style. Very fun, but I'm working my way through that. I am still just a hair's breadth away from completing Baldur's Gate 3, but I just haven't found the time, what with so many people coming to visit and things like that. So, and unlike something like Fallen Leaf, where short play sessions are possible, Baldur's Gate, you've got to dive in and be in it for a solid period of time. So that's what I've been playing and what I've been watching. What about you, Mr. Nice Guy?
Nice. And, similar thing here with the work travel and the vacation, where I purposely took time to unplug. Haven't really been playing and watching nearly as much, but have obviously been playing Fallen Leaf. Have been watching a little bit of the Olympics. And we've been on a 90s movie kick here in the Nice Guy household. So we watched Angels in the Outfield a couple weeks ago.
Nice.
Yeah, classic movie. And you watch it, you forget how funny it was when you were a kid.
Mm-hmm.
We watched The Sandlot recently. Oh, we just watched something else. It'll come to me as soon as we watched Cool Runnings this past weekend. In theme with the Olympics. And so just watching a lot of old school movies with my kids, getting them into the fun that it was to grow up in the 90s. Mac, what are people into in the chat?
We do have some from Flaming Phoenix here. He's been playing Hitman, World of Assassins, Apex Legends, Destiny 2, Rumble, that's a VR title, Hollow Knight, Star Wars Hunters, and Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End. That's the title on the Wii. As for watching The Acolyte, the Super Mario Brothers movie, the old one, the 1993 release, Rogue One, and The Rookie. So some baseball there as well, too. I know my sports ball. That's what we got in the chat.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you, everybody, for tuning in to episode 313 of Two Nerds in a Pod. We appreciate you. You're the best viewers on Twitch and the best listeners on podcast services. We'll be back next week. Same bat place, same bat time. In the meantime, vote for us in the podcast awards. Be excellent to each other and play games. See ya.
Bye.